Good morning, it's Michael Gray with rnhealthcoaching.com. The following excerpt is going to be a part of my 4x4x48 David Goggins challenge. Basically, it's 4 miles every 4 hours times 48 hours. I started this on 4 p.m. on Good Friday and I ended on Easter Sunday 2020. If you can't do 4 miles, then you do 40 minutes or more of some type of exertional activity, whatever it is that you feel that you can tolerate for that amount of time every 4 hours. And it's actually quite challenging. One of my other biggest influencers is Fridman, who is an MIT physicist and has the podcast AI podcast, which is artificial intelligence. And he took this challenge from David Goggins, as well as in between each of the iterations, he did a gratitude journal. So basically, that's what I did is on between each 4 hour interval, I did some sort of a distinct gratitude and made a video on it. So I have the full video, which is quite lengthy, and then I also have these excerpt videos between each one, which is what the following is. And thank you. Have a good day, and mend yourself, move, educate, nourish, decompress, and enjoy this lockdown. Good morning, YouTubes. Let's see. Hopefully, most of the top of my head, let me show you this says. I have issues. I love this hat. I got this hat many years ago. It is 8 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning. And one of the things that I found most challenging with this 4x4x48, besides the self-inflicted 48 hours worth of not eating, the fasting, halfway through the first half of this, and 24 hours prior to starting. The other most difficult thing was probably the videos. And that's the same thing like Fridman said in his. I chose to wait this morning to make this video. It's about 7:30 in the morning. At 4 o'clock, I got up and rode my bicycle again on the trainer inside. And whenever I'm finished making this video, I'm going to probably go do another 4 mile jog. Maybe just in circles around my driveway again. I think it's the plan. Or possibly I might go down to the beach in Pascagoula and just be near the water, which I love. So the video this morning is going to be 2 videos in one. It's going to be philosophy and gratitude on the understanding and my exposure to philosophy. And also just the number 9 is gratitude on having gratitude and presence, because this isn't a theme that I've had my entire life. And when I started realizing that the importance of gratitude and presence, it definitely shifted my mindset. One example, and this is kind of out of order this morning. One example is this was something I learned in a relationship that I was in. She might have had a complaint, something like, anytime I do something wrong, you remember it and you bring it back up, but you don't give me credit for doing all of the good things, the right things, whether or not they be big or small. So I contemplated that for a while, and I thought, she's actually correct. And so what I started doing was making what I called a good things journal. So if I had discontentment or aggravation, or if I was upset at her for anything, what I would do is I would pull out this journal and I would see all of the list of connections that we had and the things that we did together and the things that she did for me. So instead of focusing on that one thing that was aggravating me at the time, it forced me to look at the big picture. Uh, and then when I started doing that, this was, I don't know how long ago this was, 2005, 2006. Then I realized that part of journaling should be every day recognizing and making note of good things that happen throughout your day. So when I started journaling, basically on the top of the journal, I made at least one notation of something that I had gratitude for. Let me make sure this video is running. All right. There's nothing worse than making a 20-minute video and then realizing it wasn't running. So what I did was I created just a Word document on my phone, a note document, and every day, 365 days a year, I write something to have gratitude for. And this is kind of like a micro journal. And it's kind of neat because I can go back to 2017, 2016, 2015, and I can see the day that I met my wife, our first date. It can trigger my memory of, well, when did I buy that car again? And I could go back and I could see, oh, was that Honda traded in the Jeep for an Accord? You know, this kind of thing. So it's kind of nice to just have this like running list, and at the end of the year, I take the accumulation of that data of that, and then I put it into like Google document and have 2017 gratitude journal. So that's an idea that I would recommend to everybody. But speaking on just specifically philosophy and some of the philosophy things that I've learned throughout my life. As I mentioned before in the previous videos, there's press if happy, which is my two main philosophies that I've built over time that are mine is press if happy and mend yourself. So mend yourself, of course, being every day, move, educate, nourish, decompress in some fashion. And then press if happy, having gratitude and appreciation and recognition of physical, relational, emotional, social, spiritual, and intellectual and financial considerations in your life. That way, if something goes awry in one, you are frequently, daily reminded. And actually, I used to do this press if happy prior to eating every meal. And I can remember being at restaurants and maybe like an old couple come up to me after, and they're like, it's so infrequent that we see a young man like you praying before you eat, and that you're not worried about what other people think. And I said, well, thank you very much, ma'am. I appreciate you for acknowledging that, and have a blessed day. But basically what I was doing was I was going through press if prior to every meal. Then there are other people that we learn from. I think one of the basics of philosophy that we're all familiar with is just the Bible and religious views. And 4 or 5 years ago, I was going through some issues in my primary relationship at the time, and I had a lot of discontentment and just wasn't sure what path I should take. So I started going to a relationship therapist, and we discovered a couple of things. He was like, well, what would you like to work on? I'm like, well, one, I want to see if I can figure out if I can't salvage this relationship that I'm in, that we were trying to salvage.
at least how can I figure out what are the things that I'm bringing into my relationships that may be toxic or suboptimal, and how can I improve in the future to put myself in a position for either better relationships or to be a better partner. And one of the things that he determined was that my picker was broken, and that I was maybe just choosing partners that were not the best partners for me. Not that they were bad people, but just that the life goals and the philosophical views of them and the way they managed or mismanaged their life was different than the way that I manage or mismanage my life, and that I just needed to choose better, and that was a kind of an aha moment, but also you know. So, uh, but as far as the Buddhist philosophy, I just got kind of lucky. I was playing poker, and somehow I came across this idea of learning something about Buddhism. So I'm sitting there on my phone in between hands, the poker hands, and uh, did a little research, and I came across this mostly comprehensive educational CD set called Mahamudra by a Buddhist philosopher named Reginald Ray. And so I ordered it. It was, I don't remember how much it was, $100, $200, something like that. It was exceptionally worth the money. And I would sit there and I'd listen to these CDs or MP3s while I was playing poker, and I would take notes. And after a couple of them, I would it was so profound. They had so many answers to chronic questions that I've had throughout my entire life that I couldn't believe that all of the all of the questions that I had, all of the answers that I was searching for were here in this comprehensive philosophical system. And I guess it just makes sense because it's been around for so long that they've ironed out the wrinkles. But it really is amazing. And you can't go through all of it at one time in short form like this on a video. But the two biggest things were the concept of obstructions that we put on ourselves, that we kind of jack ourselves up with these obstructions, and they are three things: arrogance, reactivities, and patterns. Uh, Arrogance can also be arrogance slash ignorance. And if we're ignorant, then that's probably our own fault, and we should do something to correct whatever it is that we're lacking knowledge in. If we're having distress, anxiety, fear, worry, concern, guilt, remorse, all of these types of negative uh, emotions, that's just kind of a litmus test that something's wrong and that we're kind of missing something. Whether or not we are feeling lack for, there could be hundreds of types of lack that we might feel. And there really is no lack. And we can be feeling like we're missing something or that we don't have enough of something, and that's called scarcity. And also, there is no scarcity. So, these are some of the things that I learned through philosophers. One of my favorite on YouTube, his name is Bentino Massaro. And Eckhart Tolle. He talks about presence and gratitude. And then there are the older philosophers like Socrates and Plato. There's Immanuel Kant, like categorical imperative, act so that the maximum of your actions be the universal law binding every other rational human being. You know, basically just do what it is that would work for everyone or most everyone. or most everyone that was rational, if you were the leader of this boat, what could you do that, if everybody followed, would create the best chance for success, harmony, safety, stability, calmness, contentment, peace, love? And that was one of the other questions that I was working with this psychiatrist, psychologist. Uh, how do I learn to be content with who I am and what I have at any particular time? An example would be of discontentment or conflicting inner dialogue is I could say that I wish that I had a Jeep. I feel that if I could have any car, I would want a Jeep. So then I put myself in a position and I finagle away, and the next thing you know, I have a Jeep. But then the Jeep doesn't drive very well in the wind and it gets poor gas mileage. So then I think, probably I don't need the Jeep. Probably what would be a better car for me would be to have a Honda Accord. So I get a two-door Accord, and then I realize that I get involved in a relationship with kids, and now all of a sudden I need a four-door vehicle. So I trade the two-door car for the four-door, and now I'm wishing that I had the Jeep back. So how do you learn to be content with who you are and what you have, instead of having this vacillating concepts and feelings? And maybe that's not achievable. Maybe you can't figure out how to. Maybe it's just a human condition. Uh, and as far as the three obstructions that you have with Buddhist philosophy, you have the arrogance, the reactivities, and the patterns. So the reactivity is something that occurs in your world, and you react a certain way. Whether or not you had a long day of stress, and then you get home and you react by making popcorn, eating chocolate-covered pretzels, and watching TV instead of 3 hours watching TV instead of 2.5 hours watching TV and 30 minutes working out. And these that reactivity forms patterns, and then the patterns become more and more ingrained. So the more that you do the right patterns, the easier it is to do those, and the more that you do the wrong patterns and you react poorly, the more ingrained that's going to be. So you have to make a choice at some point to shift these things, and having awareness and doing research and educating yourself on these types of things and viewpoints helps you achieve those goals better than just floundering around trying to figure it out on your own. And I've said in another video that I don't act poorly, I react poorly at times. And so this is something that I've been working on for quite a while, is learning how to react in the proper manner instead of acting or reacting in one that's not going to help me achieve my goals. And then there are the four reminders, just as though I have press if happy. Buddhist philosophy has four reminders that are a little bit more in depth, and they are suffering, that suffering is a natural part of human existence; karma, that there are repercussions for the actions that you take and the situations that you put yourself in, and that if you are in harmful or negative self-inflicted positions, that you're going to likely have negative results. And if you put yourself amongst positive people and intentionally have positive situations for yourself, that you'll probably reap positive results. And then the preciousness of human birth, human existence and impermanence, basically the human lifespan. Uh, so as far as impermanence, this is something that I've had a strong awareness of for most of my life, long before I started intentionally seeking out this information, this journey. Uh, and I'm not exactly sure where it began in my past, but I know that maybe somewhere around the year 2000, I got my first tattoo, and it's here and it says Dead Man Walking, and it's reversed and inverted. So if I look down, the walking says I am king, and if I look in the mirror, it reads correctly as Dead Man Walking. And then also I have Let It Go, and on my ankle I have 2055, which is basically my expected human lifespan. So these are not morbid reminders. They're tools, or like flicking on the light switch of being present and having having a clear idea of the importance it is to live now, because it's going to be over soon, and to not waste time with negative situations that you should be avoiding. Now, we can't always avoid every negative situation, but you shouldn't voluntarily be in a situation that is chronically negative and putting you in a position to where the only way that you can cope with that is by reacting in a self-soothing, escapistic manner that may create patterns of drug addiction or alcohol or uh, whatever other kind of addiction or thing it is that you're using to prevent from having to face the issue or to fix the issue. Um, so number 9, with the presence and gratitude and having this heightened awareness, another person that was a big influencer to me was another Buddhist philosopher, and her name is Pema Chodron. Chotrin. First name is Pema, Pema. And one of the things that I learned from her is basically these patterns that we're in. It's kind of like a hamster on a wheel, and we're in this little glass box, which is our life, and we're just doing this hamster thing just over and over. And it's like, how do you stop the wheel and just step off for a second? Because eventually the hamster is just going to wear itself off. You have to get off the wheel and hydrate and rest and take a break sometimes, or at least step back from the wheel and observe the wheel and figure out what it is that you're doing and why you're even on that wheel. So her philosophy is that rather than having patterns and reactivity to these uncomfortable stressors, that that's when it's important to actually observe what the stressor is, or the stressors, and what's going on in your mind and the story that you're telling yourself, and you need to stay. So instead of escaping, you need to be on the other side of that. And if, let's just say, this pen is the uncomfortable thing that's going on, and over here is the 3 hours of television and the crap food that fills our stomach up and puts us to sleep because we're trying to forget about this. And usually, when you're sleeping, this shows up anyway. Uh, but what you need to do is you need to not be over here. You need to stay with whatever this is. And an example that she uses is a young child with chicken pox or the measles, and she calls it itching. So the itching is from whatever it is that's bothering us. With the 6-year-old child, it's the virus and the pustules and the things that are causing him to legitimately itch. And the scratching for him is temporary relief, but it's spreading the virus, maybe even to other people, and it's causing pustules and blisters and possibly permanent scars. So the best thing that that child could do is not itch. The itching is the television and the food and the alcohol and the drugs and the escapism. The scratching, rather. The itching is the actuator. The scratching is the behavior. When instead of scratching, you should be staying. And having the idea of the hamster wheel and these patterns and your reactivity, and then figuring out how to stay. You figure out how to stay and how to look at it through meditation and through journaling every night. Also, as far as the bad dreams popping up in the middle of night when you're trying to escape from it, the reason that you have dreams is because your brain is trying to figure out solutions to the problems that you're trying to escape. So if you stay with them while you're awake and you're alert and you have intention, it's possible that you'll very likely have less bad dreams because your brain won't be having to try and figure this stuff out while you're sleeping because you won't deal with it while you're awake. That's also part of the journaling. If you journal right before you go to bed, not on your computer, not on your phone, preferably, but with a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, that physical action of the tactile sense of you being on the pen, on the paper with the pen, and the muscle movement of your hand and your eye, connecting all of these things together, and maybe coming up with some solutions, it sticks with your brain better than if you were to just like type it real quick. So that's a solution that I've heard before. Uh, and then also when I was going to this relationship therapist, he introduced me to a gentleman named Peter Osario, who is I believe he actually is from Colorado. And he wrote a book called The Behavior of Persons. And I'm not necessarily recommending that book because it's pretty intense and it's not necessary to read the entire book. But basically, what he says is that human beings are typically one of three components mostly, and these components are our behaviors. And everybody has varying degrees of each of these, but most of us, or in certain situations, may have more of one than the other, or you will have more of one than the other. And with intention and awareness, you can shift whatever your baseline is that may be suboptimal to one that is a little bit more effective and works better and helps you reach your goals. So these three behaviors are observation, um, action, What are they? This is the challenge of doing this after not sleeping very much and coming straight off the treadmill. Okay, I remember what it is now. It's actor, observer, critic. So an example of this would be, and I'll just give you the example that was most pertinent to me. Say you're in a relationship with somebody, and this relationship could be the relationship with yourself. But I'm just going to use the example that was most pertinent to me at the time. You're in a relationship with somebody, and you guys know each other very well. But there are some things about this person and that the behaviors that they make that cause you some distress, your relationship some distress, and maybe compromise the integrity of the relationship as far as you're concerned. So you talk about these things, you may fight about these things and yell about these things, and you try and teach the other person what it is that you expect and why it is that you might be right and she may be wrong. So the example for me would be, I'm a bit of a workaholic and try and handle my own personal financial responsibilities. And she, on the other hand, didn't quite have that gene. She didn't feel that way. And I would have resentment that I was working 60, 80 hours a week, and she was having difficulty working 10. And I'm like, well, if you work even 20, 25, then I could work 40 to 60 instead of 60 to 80. So that was my kind of my rationale. But we would go through these cycles back and forth over the years to where she just couldn't tolerate the work. And I couldn't tolerate her lack of personal responsibility. What I felt was her responsibility in the joint venture of our relationship and our life together. So we had a lot of conflict about this. And many, many discussions, many, many fights, many, many going apart and coming back together with hopefully an understanding. But it was always led to the same theme, the same issues. And he was telling me about this Peter Osario guy and the behavior of persons and how everybody is either an actor, a critic, or an observer. And he asked me which one I was. And this was such an aha moment for me. Because I remember sitting there on that sofa with him in that chair and him telling me this. And I said, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand what you're talking about. And he said, well, you're telling me this story about what it is that she did that aggravated you. And basically, she told me the same thing. I can't go back to work there. I can't stand it. I don't want to be there, blah, blah, blah. And we were in the car, and I remember blowing up in the car and saying, I can't believe you're doing this again. You know what this means. And I'm screaming, and of course, I'm louder than her, so she becomes withdrawn and submissive, and I become aggressive and agitated, and pull over in a grocery store, and I'm yelling, and I'm pissed off and upset, and I'm not saying anything new. I'm just repeating shit that I've been saying for 3 or 4 years, just over and over every time the situation arises. And it just frustrates the hell out of me, and it upsets her, and it's not very productive, obviously. And it's crazy to have the same fight over and over and over and over. At some point, that's the definition of insanity, right? And so I'm telling him the story about what she did and how I reacted and how bad of a person she is and what was me and why do I have to be in this situation? What should I do? And he said, well, do you feel like you need to take action, immediately? And I said, yeah, I had to tell her how I felt. He said, well, haven't you already told her how you feel? Like, is there anything new that you told her? And I said, no, I just keep telling her over and over. And it's like, well, maybe she's just not going to get it. And then he said that you're being critical of who she is and how she wants to manage her life. So, so I said, so what are you saying? That, you know, I'm, I'm taking action when I shouldn't take action, and I'm being critical in a way that's unproductive and might not be the right way. He said, yeah. He said, maybe you should just be an observer. And I said, an observer? He said, yeah. He said, what would have happened if you would not have even reacted in the car, if you would not have taken action? What would have happened if you wouldn't have verbalized your criticism towards her, but instead you just allowed her to tell you what she told you, which was the actuator, and you just observed? And I said, well, I don't know. And I said, I guess I could have observed her reaction to me reacting differently and instituting a different pattern. I could have also observed my own internal dialogue and what the outcome would have been doing something different. And I said, so basically what you're saying is that, like, I could have just, like Pima Chodron, I could have just stayed with it instead of trying to blow it up and fix it in the car at 60 miles an hour when there was no chance that that was going to be effective. And I said, so basically what you're saying is that there's no urgency. And when I came across that line in my head, it was like, there is no urgency. I was like, we could have had the discussion later at home on the balcony, in the kitchen table. We could have had the discussion in a couple days. We could have maybe not even had the discussion, and I could have just observed her behaviors. Maybe it was hormonal. Maybe it was emotional. Maybe it was she was testing me, or she was just putting it out there because it was her way of escapism and releasing a pressure valve, because it was built up to the point to where she knew that if she told me that, she knew what my likely response was going to be, but she still felt it necessary to tell me that in the car at that time, because she felt like she had to take action. And maybe she was suffering. And maybe what she needed right then was for me to be an observer. Maybe what a lot of what we need is for the people that we love, instead of being actors, instead of having criticism towards them or being critical towards them, we need to just be present and stay and observe. And when I implemented that as one of my major philosophies, is there urgency? A year from now, is this going to matter? 99 times out of 100, or maybe 999 times out of 1,000, the answer is there is no urgency. Occasionally there is, but most of the time there isn't. Most of the time, the best thing that you can do is to not implement the negative patterns, not implement the negative reactivity, to observe your own internal dialogue, either through meditation or journaling or the combination of both. And then, in a more positive, conducive environment, situation, presentation, try and figure out if there's any way that you and the other person, or you and yourself, can work it out, to figure out maybe a new way to look at things. You can use positive influencers just by Googling or YouTubing whatever the scenario might be on your own, away from the situation, and then try and figure out maybe a new perspective. A lot of times it's just one sentence in a book that changes your life forever. And a couple of those in my lifetime, when I was young, in my early 20s, I read a lot of philosophy books and psychology books, and some like The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and I learned certain things on in that book that I've kept with me throughout my entire life. Then there's Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, Virtue of Selfishness, learning about virtues and values, and personal responsibility. And for her, it's like, I swear by my life and my love of it that I shall not live for the sake of another man, nor ask another man to live for mine. I need to be personally responsible for my own life. And I should not be putting the pressure or the stress or the problems that I have onto your shoulders if I can avoid that. There's, as I mentioned earlier, with Shakespeare, I could be bound in a nutshell and consider myself a king of infinite space were I not that I have bad dreams. Well, how can you fix the bad dreams? To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortunes, or by bearing arms oppose and end them. What does that mean? By bearing arms oppose and end them. What arms? If you're over here watching television, if you're over here drinking alcohol and taking drugs and escaping, that's not the arms. That's not the bearing arms is learning these types of things, putting yourself intentionally into the fire, into the uncomfortable situation, and and sharpening your sword, uh, acquiring tools. Those tools, these psychological tools, these philosophical tools, these ability to do difficult things on your own volition. That is bearing arms, opposing and ending the suffering of your own suffering. And not until you do that can you help others in their personal suffering. So this video's got kind of long this morning, and I have to go do this 8 a.m. Sunday morning. So I'm getting close. I have the 8 a.m. and I have the noon, and then I'm done. So I've enjoyed this so far, and I hope that there's some value in one sentence or a phrase or a story that I've given so far throughout this 4x4x48 journey. And have a great morning. Teacher of all things.